Elias Grant stumbled down the narrow corridor of the Odyssey's edge, boots clicking against the metallic floor, wishing he could blame the creaking of the ship on bad engineering instead of his own nerves. He had been assigned to what the Council diplomatically called a high-stakes liaison mission to Eloria, a planet with more rumored eccentricities than practical allies, and honestly, he wasn't thrilled. He paused mid-step when the ship's AI, with all the smugness of a know-it-all toddler, informed him that his coffee replicator had refused to brew until its existential questions were answered. "Fine," Elias muttered, dragging his hand through his hair. "Make it existential, but make it hot." He was met with a soft beep, which he decided was either assent or the beginnings of a revolt. By the time he arrived at the observation deck, the hum of the engines was a constant pulse beneath his boots, a reminder that the ship was alive in its own way. Lysera was already there. She was leaning casually against the rail, her dark hair spilling over her shoulders like liquid night, and the long ears that marked her as alien twitched with subtle curiosity. Elias stopped, blinked once, then twice, wondering if the crew had replaced her with a hologram while he wasn't looking. She was beautiful in a way that made him uneasy, human enough to recognize and trust, foreign enough to keep him perpetually alert. And then she spoke. "Warrior, may I pretend to be your wife?" Elias choked on the word he hadn't yet formulated, his mouth opening and closing like a fish trying to remember how water worked. He almost lost balance on the observation deck, which might have been the most human mistake he'd made all day. Lysera's laughter followed, light and melodic, carrying a subtle echo that made him feel as if the universe itself had giggled. "Excuse me," he finally managed, trying not to sound like a mortal who had just been struck by cosmic absurdity. She smiled wider, tilting her head at an angle that somehow made her long ears appear even more elegant. "I ask only because it will make this mission more interesting. I am told you humans do strange things with weddings." Her tone suggested mischief, amusement, and something else entirely, something he couldn't quite identify but would regret ignoring if he did. Elias pinched the bridge of his nose. "Interesting how?" Lysera leaned forward, one elbow resting on the railing. "Oh, you'll see. It involves paperwork, questionable fashion choices, and a lot of pretending. Surely you have pretended before." He frowned, which may have been the universal signal for "I'm about to lose patience," but she didn't seem fazed. If anything, her smile broadened. "Ah, yes," she said. "You do that adorable human scowl when perplexed. It suits you." Elias muttered something under his breath about aliens and their unhelpful charm. He moved closer to the observation window, trying to focus on the twin suns of Eloria glimmering in the distance, hoping the celestial distraction might give him an excuse to ignore the immediate and ludicrous situation. But Lysera was relentless, stepping beside him, her presence uncomfortably close yet somehow grounding. Her ears twitched again. "You are tense. Perhaps you are worried I am a threat." "Maybe," he said, resisting the urge to roll his eyes. "Or maybe I'm worried that I'm about to be recruited into some alien version of a romantic comedy, without a script." Romantic comedy. Her lips twitched as though she had almost laughed but thought better of it. "Ah, humor. I have been told humans use humor to confuse enemies or to build rapport. Perhaps you are doing both." Elias exhaled sharply. "Mostly I'm trying to avoid a diplomatic incident while maintaining my dignity, which is already in jeopardy thanks to you." Lysera's chuckle was quiet but persistent. "I am merely offering a proposal, accepting it is optional. Though," she added with a dramatic glance, "declining might make your days less interesting." He stared at her, part incredulous, part fascinated, and somewhere in the mix, a spark of curiosity bloomed. Despite the absurdity, there was an unmistakable energy about her, the kind that made ordinary warnings about alien trickery seem quaint. "I suppose, what exactly would this pretending entail?" he asked cautiously, though he suspected asking for details might be a mistake. "Details," she said, rolling the word on her tongue like it was a rare delicacy, are for later. First, we must establish rules. She raised one eyebrow, a human gesture rendered uncanny by the subtle elongation of her ears. Rule 1. I will mock you mercilessly. Rule 2. You may retaliate with sarcasm, though failure to do so will lower morale. Rule 3. If we survive the mission without killing each other, further exercises may be proposed. Elias blinked. Exercises. Pretend spousal activities, she said, eyes sparkling with amusement. Cooking, arguing over trivialities, possibly negotiating peace while maintaining the illusion of mutual annoyance. He groaned audibly. I am officially underqualified for this role. You humans are always underqualified, she said, smirking. But that is why you are entertaining. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden flicker in the observation deck lighting, followed by a low hum that vibrated through the floor. The ship's AI chimed in, apologetically. Unexpected energy surge in the forward plasma conduits. Nothing dangerous, probably. Lysera clapped her hands together lightly. Perfect. Nothing like a potential minor catastrophe to break the ice, don't you think? Elias muttered something unrepeatable. The irony of surviving a starship plasma surge while contemplating pretend marriage wasn't lost on him. Fine, he said finally. Let's pretend then. For science, diplomacy, or whatever reason keeps this from being a complete nightmare. Lysera's grin widened, and she linked her arm through his in an uncharacteristically human gesture. Excellent, now, warrior. Let us see if you can survive my company without losing your composure. Elias allowed himself a small, reluctant smile. You do know you're testing me on multiple levels of discomfort, right? I do, she said, tilting her head so her long ears caught the ambient light. And I consider it highly educational, plus it's amusing. The first step toward something strange, inexplicable, and possibly universe-altering had begun, and Elias realized that if he survived this, it would be a story worth telling, or laughing about, for the rest of his life. Above them, the stars stretched endlessly, indifferent, twinkling as if enjoying the cosmic joke playing out on a tiny ship near a tiny planet with a pair of absurdly mismatched companions. And somewhere deep inside Elias, amidst irritation, skepticism, and a reluctant curiosity, the faintest flicker of intrigue and anticipation stirred. The morning on the Odyssey's edge began with the hum of engines that sounded suspiciously like someone clearing their throat, and Elias Grant groaned as he rolled out of his bunk. Somehow, despite zero gravity's generous allowance for awkward dismounts, he managed to land on the floor with a graceless thud that could have qualified as a new form of interstellar yoga. Lysera appeared in the doorway almost immediately, hair cascading like a comet's tail, long ears tilted in what he suspected was amusement. Ah, warrior, your landing technique is innovative, she said, crossing her arms as if she were a judge at some cosmic talent show. One day, I will tell the story of this day with great flair and dramatization. Please don't, he said, rubbing his shoulder where gravity and poor coordination had collided. I prefer my dignity intact, or at least in partial remission. She tilted her head, catching the light so her eyes seemed to glimmer faintly. Dignity is overrated. Humor, on the other hand, is essential for survival. Elias didn't have time to argue before she darted past him, practically gliding down the corridor in a way that was both infuriating and mesmerizing. He followed, muttering under his breath about aliens, audacity, and caffeine deficiency. By the time he reached the ship's galley, he found Lysera fiddling with the replicator, which now beeped at her as if scolding a child. Do you need assistance? He asked cautiously. Assistance is optional, she replied, not looking up. But observation is encouraged. Humans seem to have a peculiar attachment to liquids that are hot and bitter. She paused, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. You drink it daily. Fascinating ritual. Possibly a test of patience and endurance. Elias raised an eyebrow. Or addiction, pick one. She considered this seriously, nodding. Yes, addiction, that is plausible. Shall we proceed with the ceremony? He frowned. Ceremony. The coffee-making ritual, she said, tapping the console. It is, as you say, a test of patience and endurance. We begin with beans or synthetics. He groaned, but participated anyway, which meant spilling half the synthesized blend across the counter, before Lysera floated a cup toward him with a flick of her hand, grinning. Precision is not your strong suit, warrior, yet somehow this is endearing. Endearing. Elias didn't know whether to take offense or feel slightly validated. He settled for muttering about paperwork, treaties, and interstellar embarrassment while she leaned against the counter, watching him like a cat with an unusually tall tail. Breakfast, or whatever approximated breakfast in space, over, Lysera insisted on accompanying him to the training module. We must practice pretend spousal activities, she said, twirling in the zero-gravity corridor. For example, combat drills. You humans seem to enjoy threatening each other with sticks of metal. Fascinating. Combat drills are mandatory, Elias said, and if you touch my training sword, I will. She spun, snatching the weapon midair with a flourish, and his protest was cut short. Teach you the art of self-defense with grace, she finished, arching an eyebrow. Or, at minimum, I will make you look ridiculous. The ensuing session was predictably chaotic. Swords clanged, bodies floated unexpectedly, and Lysera managed to knock him over not once, but 3 times, each time giggling like it was the first time she had discovered gravity's quirks. At one point, Elias attempted a serious strike, only for her to sidestep with a fluid motion and tap him on the shoulder. Predictable, warrior. You must diversify your techniques. Variety is the spice of survival. I'm beginning to suspect your idea of marriage includes humiliation, he muttered, untangling himself from the tether line. Only temporary, she said cheerfully, brushing her hair from her face. Permanent humiliation would be less educational. After training, Lysera insisted they tour the ship's hydroponics bay, where bioluminescent plants glowed softly in their controlled environment. Food cultivation is an art form, she said, poking a curious leaf. And in zero gravity, an unpredictable one. Watch your step, warrior, unless you wish to encounter spontaneous levitation salads. As if on cue, a small lettuce pod drifted toward him, and he caught it just before it collided with his forehead. Remarkable, he said, deadpan. Truly, the height of culinary adventure. See, Lysera laughed. Humor and danger intertwined. Marriage preparation, step 2. Later, they attempted the simulated diplomacy protocol, a holographic recreation of a tense interstellar negotiation with multiple alien species. Lysera adopted an exaggeratedly stern expression, deliberately misinterpreting Elias' instructions. You must protest mildly while asserting dominance, she whispered, though the whisper was accompanied by a smirk that made him suspicious she was planning mischief. You do realize they are holograms, he said, frowning, and that they can't feel humiliation. Humiliation is a concept, she said, that transcends reality. Observe. She leaned in, giving him an earful of whispered instructions, her long ears brushing against his arm. Now, frown, look intimidating, and accidentally compliment them at the same time. A delicate balance. The holograms blinked, reacted, and Elias blinked back, unsure whether to feel insulted, impressed, or completely bewildered. Lysera's laughter rang out across the training deck, a melody that somehow made the absurdity bearable. You humans are delightfully predictable, she said, eyes glinting. But adaptable, that is promising. By evening, they were back in the observation bay, watching Eloria's twin moons drift across the horizon. The gravity had been normalized, but Elias was still tired from a day filled with floating swords, levitating lettuce, and carefully timed sarcasm. Lysera floated beside him, the soft light catching her long ears, giving them an ethereal shimmer. You survived the day, she said, and without major casualties, I might add. I'm counting the bruises, Elias muttered, Minor details, she replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face with a human-like gesture. The point is, you laughed, you survived, and you tolerated me. A trifecta of success. Elias couldn't help the corner of his mouth twitching. If this is marriage preparation, I think I'm in trouble. Not trouble, she said, tilting her head with a grin. Adventure, and marriage, real or pretend, is just another form of adventure. Humor and adaptability are key. So far, you're doing reasonably well. They sat in companionable silence, punctuated only by the occasional beep of the ship and the distant hum of stars outside the viewport. Elias realized he wasn't just exhausted, he was intrigued. Lysera had turned the absurdity of her proposal into something unexpectedly engaging. He might even admit, quietly to himself, that he looked forward to her relentless commentary, her teasing, her absurd games. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the bruises, the laughter, and the floating lettuce, he acknowledged a new reality. Surviving Eloria might require diplomacy, combat readiness, and a very peculiar sense of humor. But surviving Lysera might require something more, a willingness to embrace the ridiculous, the unpredictable, and the wholly human-alien mix of companionship she offered. For all the chaos, the humor, and the odd lessons in pretend marriage, Elias realized he was, somehow, ready for the next step. The shuttle doors hissed open onto the surface of Eloria's uncharted moon, and Elias Grant blinked against the strange green glow of the atmosphere. Lysera floated beside him, long ears twitching in anticipation, her dark hair catching the luminescence like a halo of mischief. "I told you the adventure would begin with minor danger," she said, voice almost melodic. "I may have underestimated slightly." Elias grunted. Slightly is one way to put it. You could also call it terrifying, absurd, and my new definition of chaos. She laughed, the sound drifting across the barren, crystalline terrain. Chaos is educational, warrior, and it builds character, or so I am told by humans. He shook his head. "I think you're just trying to humiliate me one last time before the real threat arrives." "Maybe," she said, stepping closer. "But consider, humiliation builds resilience. You will thank me later." They were not wrong. The electromagnetic storms of the moon had already proven unpredictable, and the readings from the shuttle's sensors flickered with wild spikes. Elias checked the grav boots strapped to his feet, scanning the unstable surface for the shimmering energy pulses that could throw them into orbit, or worse, fry the shuttle's systems. Lysera peeked at the display, ears twitching. "Fascinating," she murmured. "The storm is intelligent, or at least reactive. It seems to enjoy playful interference." "You mean it's trying to kill us," Elias corrected. "Drama is part of survival," she said, grinning. "Besides, it makes pretend marriage exercises more authentic." He groaned. "I'm reconsidering this entire engagement." The storm erupted suddenly, twisting the crystalline terrain into a kaleidoscope of light and static energy. Elias grabbed for Lysera's arm instinctively, and she yanked herself closer, her long ears brushing against his neck as if to ground him. "Ah," she said, voice teasing but firm. "Human reflexes are adequate when the stakes are high. We may survive after all." "Barely," he muttered, adjusting the grav boots as a shockwave sent him tumbling. Lysera caught him midair, spinning them both upright with a laugh that could have been recorded and sold as pure amusement. "You humans are predictable," she said, "and surprisingly strong when motivated by fear, or curiosity, or sarcasm." He gave her a glare that was mostly humor, mostly exasperation. "Please, no more motivational speeches during near-death experiences." She tilted her head, her hair floating like dark ribbons. "Noted, warrior. I will limit commentary to intermittent jokes." They advanced toward the energy nexus at the center of the moon, the source of the storm, weaving between arcs of glowing plasma that danced across the jagged terrain. Elias was forced to rely on every instinct honed in years of training, but Lysera's presence, her laughter, and her teasing commentary somehow made him lighter, more agile, more willing to risk an unconventional move. "You're different," she said suddenly, voice quieter. "Stronger in ways I did not expect. And you laugh even when you should be terrified. It's charming." He smirked, though the corner of his eye still scanned for danger. "Charming is one word for it. Crazy might be another." She leaned closer, just close enough that her long ears brushed his shoulder. "You have grown, warrior. From rigid human soldier to someone who can adapt, survive, and, dare I say, enjoy absurdity while still saving lives." Elias swallowed. "I've also survived by having a very, very strange pretend wife," he said, the corners of his mouth twitching in a reluctant grin. The energy nexus pulsed violently, sending a wave toward them, and they dived together, rolling across the uneven crystal ground. Sparks of electricity flared across their path, but Elias noticed how Lysera's calm, playful guidance kept him steady. "Pretend wife tactics," he gasped. "Multi-purpose," she replied with a wink. "Also great for confidence building." They reached the core, a spinning orb of plasma energy, and worked together to stabilize it. Lysera's hands glowed faintly, manipulating the energy with deft motions that made Elia's head spin. "You could never do this alone," she said. "Even if you were heroic, even if you were human." He gritted his teeth, focusing, following her guidance. "We make a good team," he admitted. "Better than any holographic exercise," she said, grinning. Finally, with a coordinated effort, they dampened the storm, the orb settling into a calm, pulsing glow. Elias sank to one knee, panting, and Lysera floated beside him, hands brushing his arm in a gesture that felt human and intimate. "We did it," he said, voice rough but triumphant. She tilted her head, long ears twitching, and laughed softly. "Indeed. Perhaps we should celebrate with levitating coffee." "Only if you don't put it on my forehead," he muttered, a smile breaking across his face. As they made their way back to the shuttle, Elias reflected on the past days. The ridiculous pretend marriage exercises, the floating lettuce, the zero-gravity combat drills, the playful teasing, and now this near-death adventure. Lysera had transformed what should have been a sterile diplomatic mission into an experience filled with humor, unpredictability, and surprisingly deep companionship. Back aboard the ship, the crew's chatter resumed, but Elias noticed the difference in himself. He laughed more freely, tolerated absurdity with a lighter heart, and found himself genuinely looking forward to Lysera's playful commentary. The pretend wife act had evolved into something neither of them could have predicted, a bond forged in humor, survival, and mutual respect. Lysera floated beside him, her dark hair shimmering under the cabin lights. "You survived the moon," she said softly, "and I suspect, warrior, you have grown beyond the rigidness I first observed. You are ready." Elias glanced at her, long ears twitching in the ambient light, and realized he had come to care more than he expected. "Ready for what?" he asked, though he suspected the answer. "Ready for partnership," she said, with a grin that hinted at mischief and sincerity all at once. "For adventure, and perhaps for a little more pretend marriage if you survive the paperwork." He laughed, a deep, genuine laugh that startled even him. "You know, I think I just might." And in that moment, as the ship hummed beneath them and the twin suns of Eloria winked in the distance, Elias understood the transformation he had undergone. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a partner, a friend, and someone willing to embrace absurdity, danger, and humor all at once. With Lysera by his side, life, pretend or otherwise, was richer, lighter, and infinitely more unpredictable. He glanced at her and she returned the look, ears flicking slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forged through chaos, laughter, and survival. No more pretending, no more tests, just the beginning of something genuine. Elias smiled. "Let's see where the universe takes us next." Lysera laughed, linking her arm through his. "Oh, warrior, I have a feeling it's going to be spectacular."